After the flurry of orders, he sat back and stared at the map. Some things at least made sense. All these barricades looked inward. People were barricading themselves against the palace and the centre of the city. No one would be bothered much about the outside world. If you had to take an outlying part of the city in those circumstances, then the thing to do would be to go in via a gatehouse in the city wall. They might not be quite so guarded as they ought to be. Tom? Yes, Clive? Have you ever sung the national anthem? Oh, lots of times, sir. I don't mean officially. You mean just to show I'm patriotic? Good gods, no. That would be rather an odd thing to do, said the captain. And how about the flag? Well, obviously I salute it every day, sir. But you don't wave it at all? The major inquired. I think I waved a paper one a few times when I was a little boy. Patrician's birthday or something. We stood in the streets as he rode by and we shouted, hurrah! Never since then? Well, no, Clive, said the captain, looking embarrassed. I'd be very worried if I saw a man singing the national anthem and waving the flag, sir. It's really a thing foreigners do. Really? Why? We don't need to show we're patriotic, sir. I mean, this is Ankh-Morpork. We don't have to make a big fuss about being the best, sir. We just know. It was a beguiling theory that might have arisen in the minds of Wiglet and Waddy and, yes, even in the not overly exercised mind of Fred Colon, and as far as Vimes could understand it, it went like this. 1. Supposing the area behind the barricades was bigger than the area in front of the barricades, right? 2. Like, sort of, it had more people in it and more of the city, if you follow me. 3. Then, correct me if I'm wrong, Sarge, but that'd mean, in a manner of speaking, we are now in front of the barricades, am I right? 4. Then, as it were, it's not like we're rebelling, is it? 'Cause there's more of us, so the majority can't rebel, it stands to reason. 5. So that makes us the good guys. Obviously, we've been the good guys all along, but now it'd be kind of official, right? Like mathematical. 6. So we thought we'd push on to Short Street, and then we could nip down into Dimwell and up the other side of the river. 7. Are we going to get in trouble for this, Sarge? 8. You're looking at me in a funny way, Sarge. 9. Sorry, Sarge. Vimes, with an increasingly worried Fred Colon in front of him, and some of the other barricadiers standing around as if caught in an illicit game of knocking on doors and running away, thought about this. The men watched him carefully in case of explosion. And it actually made a weird kind of logic, if you didn't factor in considerations like real life and common sense. They'd worked hard. It was easy enough to block a city street, heavens knew. You just nailed planks around a couple of wagons and piled it high with furniture and junk. That took care of the main streets, and with enough pushing you could move it forwards. As for the rest, it really hadn't been that hard. There had been lots of small barricades in any case. The lads had simply joined them up, without anyone really noticing. The People's Republic of Treaclemine Road now occupied almost a quarter of the city. Vimes took a few deep breaths. Fred, he said. Yes, Sarge. Did I tell you to do this? No, Sarge. There's too many alleys. There's too many people, Fred. Colon brightened. Oh, well, there's more coppers too, Sarge. A lot of the lads found their way here. Good lads, too. And Sergeant Dickens, he knows about this stuff. He remembers the last time this happened, Sarge. So he asked every able-bodied man who knew how to use a weapon to muster up, Sarge. There's a lot of them, Sarge. We got an army, Sarge. This is how the world collapses, thought Vimes. I was just a young fool. I didn't see it like this. I thought Kiel was leading a revolution. I wonder if that's what he thought too. But I just wanted to keep a few streets safe. I just wanted to keep a handful of decent, silly people away from the dumb mobs and the mindless rebels and the idiot soldiery. I really, really hoped we could get away with it. Maybe the monks were right. Changing history is like damming a river. It'll find its way around. He saw Sam beaming among the men. Hero worship, he thought. That sort of thing can turn you blind. Any trouble? He said. Don't think anyone's worked out what's happening here, Sarge. There's been a lot happening round Dolly Sisters and over that way. Cavalry charges and what have you. Hold on, here comes some more. A watchman had signalled from the top of the barricade. Vimes heard the commotion on the other side of the pile. More people running away from Dolly Sisters by the look of it, said Colon. What do you want us to do, Sarge? Keep them out, thought Vimes. We don't know who they are. We can't let everyone in. Some of them will be trouble. The trouble is, I know what's going on out there. The city is a little slice of hell and there's no real safety anywhere. And I know what I'm going to decide because I watched me decide it. I don't believe this. I'm standing over there now, a kid who's still clean and pink and full of ideals, looking at me as if I'm some kind of hero. I don't dare not be. I'm going to make the stupid decision because I don't want to look bad in front of myself. Try explaining that to anyone who hasn't had a couple of drinks. All right, let 'em through, he said. But no weapons. Pass the word round. Take weapons off, people, said Colon. Think about it, Fred. We don't want unmentionables in here, do we, or soldiers in disguise? A man's got to be vouched for before he can carry arms. I ain't going to be stabbed in the back and the front at the same time. Oh, and Fred. I don't know if I can do this. Probably it won't last. But as far as I'm concerned, you're promoted as sergeant. Anyone who wants to argue about the extra stripe, tell him to argue with me. Fred Colon's chest, already running to fat, swelled visibly. Right, Sarge. Does that mean I still take orders from you? Right. I still take orders from you, right. Don't move any more barricades. Fill up the alleys. Hold this line. Vimes, you come with me. I'll need a runner. I'm pretty runny, Sarge, Nobby volunteered from somewhere behind him. Then what I want you to do, Nobby, is get out there and find out what's happening now. Sergeant Dickens turned out to be younger than Vimes remembered, but he was still close to retirement. He'd maintained a flourishing sergeant's moustache, waxed to points and clearly dyed, and the proper sergeant shape occasioned by means of undisclosed corsetry. He'd spent a lot of time in the regiments, Vimes recalled, although he came from Llamadels originally. The men found that out because he belonged to some druid religion so strict that they didn't even use standing stones, and they were strongly against swearing, which is a real handicap in a sergeant, or would be if sergeants weren't so good at improvising. He was currently in Welcome Soap, a continuation of Cable Street, and he had the army. It wasn't much of one. No two weapons were exactly alike, and most of them were not, strictly speaking, weapons. Vimes shuddered when he saw the crowd and had a flashback, which was probably a flash forward, to all the domestic disputes he'd attended over the years. You knew where you were with strictly speaking weapons when they came at you. It was the not strictly speaking ones that scared the khaki out of a new recruit. It was the meat cleavers tied to poles. It was the long spikes and the meat hooks. This was, after all, the area of small traders, porters, butchers, and longshoremen. And so standing in raggedy lines in front of Vimes were men who, every day, peacefully and legally, handled things with blades and spikes that made a mere sword look like a girl's hatpin. There were classic weapons, too. Men had come back from wars with their sword or their halberd. Weapons? Gods bless you, sir, no, them's mementos. And the sword had probably been used to poke the fire, and the halberd had done duty as a support for one end of the washing line, and their original use had been forgotten. Until now. Vimes stared at the metalwork. All this lot would have to do to win a battle would be to stand still. If the enemy charged them hard enough, he'd come out the other side as mince. Some of them are retired watchmen, sir, Dickens whispered. A lot of them have been in the regiments at one time or another, see. There's a few kids wanting to see some action, you know how it is. What do you think? I'd certainly hate to fight them, said Vimes. At least a quarter of the men had white hair, and more than a few were using their weapons as a means of support. Come to that, I'd hate to be responsible for giving them an order. If I said about turn to this lot, it'd be raining limbs. They're resolute, sir. Fair enough, but I don't want a war. Oh, it won't come to that, sir, said Dickens. I've seen a few barricades in my time. It generally ends peaceful. The new man takes over, people get bored, everyone goes home, see. But Winder is a nutter, said Vimes. Tell me one that wasn't, sir, said Dickens. Sir, thought Vimes. Or sir, at least. And he's older than me. Oh, well. I might as well be good at it. Sergeant, he said, I want you to pick 20 of the best, men that have seen action, men you can trust, and I want them down at Shambling Gate and alert." Dickens looked puzzled. "That's bad, sir, and it's right down behind us it is. I thought maybe—" "Down at the gate, Sergeant," Vimes insisted. "They're to watch for anyone sneaking up to unbar it, and I want the guard on the bridges to be strengthened. Put down caltrops on the bridge, string wires. I want anyone who tries to come at us over the bridge to have a really bad time, understand?" "Do you know something, sir?" said Dickens with his head on one side. "Let's just say I'm thinking like the enemy, shall we?" said Vimes. He took a step closer and lowered his voice. "You know some history, Di. No one with an ounce of sense goes up against a barricade. You find a weakness." "There's other gates down there, sir," said Dickens doubtfully. "Yes, but if they take Shambling, they get into Elm Street and have a nice long gallop, right into where we're not expecting them," said Vimes. "But you are expecting them, sir." Vimes just gave him a blank look, which sergeants are quite good at deciphering. "As good as done, sir," said Dickens happily. "But I want a decent presence at all the barricades," said Vimes, "and a couple of patrols that can go wherever there's trouble. Sergeant, you know how to do it." "Right, sir." Dickens saluted smartly and grinned. He turned to the assembled citizenry. "All right, you shower," he yelled. "Some of you has been in a regiment, I know it. How many of you knows all the little angels?" A few of the more serious class of mementos rose in the air. "Very good. Already we has a choir. Now this is a soldier's song, see? You don't look like soldiers, but by the gods I'll see you sounds like 'em. You'll pick it up as we goes along. Right turn, march. All the little angels rise up, all the little angels rise up high. Sing it, you songs of mothers." The marchers picked up the response from those who knew it. "How do they rise up, rise up, rise up? How do they rise up high? Raise heads up, heads up, heads up," sang out Dickens as they turned the corner. Vimes listened as the refrain died away. "That's a nice song," said young Sam, and Vimes realised that he was hearing it for the first time. "It's an old soldier's song," he said. "Really, Sarge? But it's about angels." "Yes," thought Vimes, "and it's amazing what bits those angels caused to rise up as the song progresses. It's a real soldier's song, sentimental with dirty bits. As I recall, they used to sing it after battles," he said. "I've seen old men cry when they sing it," he added. "Why? It sounds cheerful." They were remembering who they were not singing it with, thought Vimes. "You'll learn. I know you will." After a while the patrols came back. Major Mountjoy Standfast was bright enough not to ask for written reports. They took too long and weren't very well spelled. One by one the men told the story. Sometimes Captain Wrangle, who was plotting things on the map, would whistle under his breath. "It's huge, sir. It really is. Nearly a quarter of the city's behind the barricades down there." The Major rubbed his forehead and turned to Trooper Gabbitas, the last man in and the one who seemed to have taken pains to get the most information. "They're all on a sort of line, sir, so I rode up to the one on Hero Street with my helmet off and looking off duty, sort of thing, and I asked what it was all about. A man shouted down that everything was all right, thank you very much, and they'd finished all the barricades for now. I said, what about law and order? And they said, we've got plenty, thank you. No one fired at you? No, sir. Wish I could say the same about around here. People were throwing stones at me, and an old lady emptied a utensil all over me from her window. There's something else, sir. Out with it, man. I think I recognised a few people upon barricades. They were some of ours, sir." Vimes shut his eyes, in the hope that the world would be a better place. But when he opened them, it was still full of the pink face of only just Sergeant Colon. "Fred," he said, "I wonder if you fully understand the basic idea here. The soldiers, that's the other people, Fred, they stay on the outside of the barricade. If they are on the inside, Fred, we don't, in any real sense, have a bloody barricade. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir, but—" "You want to do a spell in the regiment, Fred. And one of the things I think you'll find they're very hot on indeed is knowing who's on your side and who is not, Fred. But, sir, they are... I mean, how long have I known you, Fred?
2 or 3 days, sir.
Right, yeah, of course. Seems longer. So why, Fred, do I arrive here and find you've let in what seems like a platoon? You haven't been thinking metaphysically again, have you?
It started with Billy Wiglet's brother, sir, said Colon nervously. A few of his mates came with him, all local lads, and there's a lad Nancy Ball grew up with, and a bloke who's the son of Waddy's next-door neighbour, who we used to go out drinking with, and then there's...
How many, Fred? Said Vimes wearily.
60, sir. Might be a few more by now.
And it doesn't occur to you that they might be part of some clever plan?
No, Sarge, it never did, because I can't see Wally Wiglet being part of a clever plan, Sarge, on account of him not being much of a thinker, sir. They only allowed him to be in the regiment after he got someone to paint L and R on his boots. See, we know 'em all, Sarge. Most of the lads join up for a bit, just to get out of the city and maybe show Johnny Foreigner who's boss. They never expected to have old grannies spitting on them in their own city, Sarge. That can get a lad down, that sort of thing, and getting cobblestones chucked at them too, of course.
Vimes gave in. It was all true. All right, he said. But if this goes on, everyone is going to be inside the barricade, Fred. And there could be worse ways of ending it, he thought. People had lit fires in the streets. Some cooking pots had been brought out. But most of the people were engaging in Ankh-Morpork's traditional pastime, which was hanging around to see what would happen next. What's going to happen next, Sarge? Said Sam. I think they'll attack in 2 places, said Vimes. The cavalry will go right outside the city and try to come in through the Shambling Gate, because that'll look easy. And the soldiers and the rest of the watch who aren't on our side will probably creep across Misbegot Bridge under cover. Are you sure, sir? Positive, said Vimes. After all, it had already happened. Or something. He pinched the bridge of his nose. He couldn't quite remember when he'd slept last. Slept, not dozed or been unconscious. He knew his thinking was a little fuzzy around the edges, but he did know how the Treacle Mine Road barricade had been broken. It had been only one sentence in the history book, but he remembered it. Sieges that weren't broken via treachery were breached via some small door around the back. It was a fact of history. But it won't be for an hour or 2, he said aloud. We're not important enough. It's all been quiet down here. It's when they start to wonder why that the midden will hit the windmill. Lots of people are getting through, Sarge. Some of the men said they could hear screaming in the distance. People are just piling in. There's robberies and everything going on out there. Lance Constable? Yes, Sarge? You know when you wanted to swing a club at that torturing bastard and I stopped you? Yes, Sarge? That's why, lad. Once we break down, it all breaks down. Yes, Sarge, but you do bop people over the head. Interesting point, Lance Constable. Logical and well-made too, in a clear tone of voice bordering on the bloody cheeky. But there's a big difference. And what's that, Sarge? You'll find out, said Vimes, and privately thought, the answer is, it's me doing it. I'll grant that it's not a good answer, because people like Carsey use it too, but that's what it boils down to. Of course, it's also to stop me knifing them, and let's be frank, them knifing me. That's quite important too. Their walk had brought them to a big fire in the centre of the street. A cauldron was bubbling on it, and people were queuing up holding bowls. Smells good, he said, to the figure gently stirring the cauldron's contents with a ladle. Oh, it's you, Mr. Dibbler. It's called Victory Stew, Sergeant, said Dibbler. 2pence a bowl or I'll cut my throat, eh? Close enough, said Vimes, and looked at the strange, and what was worse, occasionally hauntingly familiar, lumps seething in the scum. What's in it? It's stew, explained Dibbler. Strong enough to put hairs on your chest. Yes, I can see that some of those bits of meat have got bristles on them already, said Vimes. Right, that's how good it is. It looks very nice, said Sam weakly. You'll have to excuse the Lance Constable, Mr. Dibbler, said Vimes. The poor lad was brought up not to eat stew that winks at him. He sat down with his bowl and his back against the wall and looked up at the barricade. People had been busy. In truth, there wasn't much else to do. The one here, from side to side of Hero Street, was 14 feet high and even had a crude walkway. It looked businesslike. He leaned back and shut his eyes. There was a hesitant slurping sound beside him as young Sam tried the stew, and then, "Is it going to come down to fighting, Sarge?" "Yes," said Vimes without opening his eyes. "Like, really fighting?" "Yep." "But won't there be some talking first?" "No," said Vimes, trying to make himself comfortable. "Maybe some talking afterwards." "Seems the wrong way round." "Yes, lad, but it's a tried and tested method." There was no further comment. Slowly, with the sounds of the street in his ears, Vimes slid into sleep. Major Mountjoy Standfast knew what would happen if he sent a message to the palace. "What do I do now, sir?" was not something his lordship wanted to hear. It was not the sort of question a major was supposed to ask, given that the original orders had been very clear. Barricades were to be torn down, rebels were to be repelled, grasp the nettle firmly and all that. He had, as a child, grasped nettles firmly, and had sometimes had a hand the size of a small pig. There were deserters behind the barricade. Deserters? How did that happen? It was a huge barricade. It was lined with armed men. There were deserters on it, and he had his orders. It was all clear. If only they'd, well, rebel. He'd sent Trooper Gabbitas down there again, and by his account it seemed very peaceful. Normal city life appeared to be going on behind the barricade, which was more than you could say for the chaos outside it. If they'd fired on Gabbitas or thrown things, that would have made it so much easier. Instead, they were acting, well, decently. That was no way for enemies of the state to behave. An enemy of the state was in front of the Major now. Gabbitas had not come back empty-handed. "Caught it sneaking after me," he said. To the captive he said, "Been behind the barricade, haven't we, my lad?" "Can it speak?" said the Major, staring at the thing. "There's no need to be like that," said Nobby Nobbs. "It's a street urchin, sir," said the trooper. The Major stared at all he could see of the prisoner, which was an oversized helmet and a nose. "Get it something to stand on, will you, Captain?" he said, and waited while a stool was found. It did not, all things considered, improve matters. It just gave rise to questions. "It's got a watch badge, trooper. Is it some kind of mascot?" "Carved it myself out of soap," said Nobby, "so I can be a copper." "Why?" said the Major. There was something about the apparition that, despite the urgency, called for a kind of horrified yet fascinated study. "But I'm thinking of going on for a soldier if I grow up," Nobby went on, giving the Major a happy grin. "Much better pickings, the way things are going." "I'm afraid you're not tall enough," said the Major quickly. "Don't see why not. The enemy reaches all the way to the ground," said Nobby. "Anyway, people are lying down when you get their boots off. Old Sconner, he says the money's in teeth and earrings, but I say every man's bound to have a pair of boots, right? Whereas there's a lot of bad teeth around these days, and the false teeth makers always demand a decent set." "Do you mean to tell me that you want to join the army just to loot the battlefields?" said the Major, completely shocked. "A little lad like you?" "Once, when old Sconner was sober for 2 days together, he made me a little set of soldiers," said Nobby. "And they had these little boots that you could—" "Shut up," said the Major. "Take off, and tiny little wooden teeth that you could—" "Will you shut up?" said the Major. "Have you no interest in honour, glory, love of city?" "Dunno. Can you get much for 'em?" said Nobby. "They are priceless." "Oh, well, in that case I'll stick with the boots if it's all the same to you," said Nobby. "You can sell 'em for 10 pence a pair if you know the right shop." "Look at Trooper Gabbitas there," said the Major, now quite upset. 20 years' service, a fine figure of a soldier. He wouldn't stoop to stealing the boots of a fallen enemy, would you, Trooper?" "No, sir. Mug's game, sir," said Trooper Gabbitas. And this was true. Don't bother with the boots would have been Trooper Gabbitas's advice, had he been inclined to part with it. You need to bribe someone on the baggage carts to build up stock, and when all's said and done, you'll only make a few dollars.
Stick to jewellery. It's portable. Trooper Gabitas had seen too many battlefields up close to use the word glory without wincing. Yes, right, said the Major. You could learn a lot from men like Trooper Gabitas, Master Nobbs. By the sound of it, your time with the rebels has filled your head with very wrong ideas indeed. I ain't a rebel, Nobby shouted. Don't you go calling me a rebel. I ain't a rebel. I'm an Ankh-Morpork lad, I am, and proud of it. Ha! You are wrong. I've never been a rebel, and you're cruel to say so. I'm an honest lad, I am. Big tears began to run down his cheeks, washing aside the grime to reveal the lower strata of grime beneath. The Major had no experience of this sort of thing. Every available orifice on the little lad's face seemed to be gushing. He looked for help to Gabitas. You're a married man, aren't you, Trooper? What are we supposed to do now? I could give him a clout alongside the ear, sir, said Trooper Gabitas. That's very unfeeling, Trooper. Look here. I had a handkerchief on me somewhere. Huh! I have my own wiper, thank you very much. I don't have to be condescended at, sniffed Nobby, and pulled one out of his pocket. In fact, he pulled several dozen, including one with the initials CMS on it. They were tangled together like a conjurer's flags of all nations, and dragged with them several purses and half a dozen spoons. Nobby wiped his face with the first one and thrust the entire collection back into his pocket. At this point he realised that all the men were staring at him. What? He said defiantly. Tell us about this man Keel, said the Major. I don't know nothing, said Nobby automatically. Aha! That means you do know something, said the Major, who was indeed the sort of person who liked this kind of little triumph. Nobby looked blank. The captain leaned forward to whisper to his superior officer. Only under the rules of mathematics, sir, he said. Under the rules of common grammar, he is merely being Tell us about Keel, the Major shouted. Tell you what, Major, why not leave that sort of thing to the experts, said a voice. The Major looked up. Carcer and his men had entered the tent. The sergeant was grinning again. Got yourself a little prisoner, have you? He said, stepping forward to examine Nobby. Reckon you've got a ringleader here, yeah. Told you anything, has he? I shouldn't think so. You need special training to get the best out of lads like this. He slipped his hand into his pocket. When it came out, the knuckles were ringed with brass. Now then, lad, he said as the soldiers watched in horror. You know who I am, do you? I'm in the particulars, me, and I can see two of you. One of them's a lively lad who's going to help the proper authorities with their business, and the other is a lippy little bugger who's going to try to be clever. One of these lads has a future, and all his teeth. Now, the funny thing about me, it's a little habit of mine, is that I never ask a question twice. So, you're not a criminal, are you? Nobby, his eyes huge and fixed on the brass knuckles, shook his head. You just do what you have to do to survive, right? Nobby nodded. In fact, you were probably a decent lad before you fell in with the rebels, I expect. Sang hymns and all that. Nobby nodded. This man, who calls himself Sergeant Keel, is the ringleader of the rebels, yes? There was a moment of hesitation, and then Nobby raised a hand. Everyone does what he tells them. Is that the same thing? He said. Yep. Is he charismatic? Nobby kept staring at the brass knuckles. I don't know. I haven't heard him cough much. And what do they talk about beyond the barricade, my little lad? Well, justice and truth and freedom and stuff, said Nobby. Aha! Rebel talk, said Carcer, straightening up. Is it? Said the Major. Take it from me, Major, said Carcer. When you get a bunch of people using words like that, they're up to no good. He looked down at Nobby. Now, I wonder what I've got in my pocket for a good boy, eh? Oh, yes, someone's ear. Still warm. Here you go, kid. Gaw, thanks, mister. Now, run a long way away or I'll gut ya. Nobby fled.
Carcer glanced at the map spread on the desk. Oh, you're planning a little sortie. That's nice. Don't want to upset the rebels, do we? Why aren't you bloody well attacking, Major? Well, they're not. You're losing your troops to 'em. They hold a quarter of the city, and you're going to sneak around the back, across the bridge I see, and up Elm Street, quiet like you are frightened. Carcer's hand smashed down onto the table, making the Major jump. I'm frightened of no man, he lied. You're the city right now, said Carcer, a little speck of white foam appearing at the corner of his mouth. They sneak, you don't. You ride right up to them and damn them to hell, that's what you do. They're stealing the streets from you. You take 'em back. They put themselves beyond the law, you take the law to 'em. He stepped back, and the manic rage subsided as quickly as it arrived. That's my advice, he said. Of course, you know your own business best. Me and what's left of my poor lads, we're going to go out and fight. I'm sure their lordships will appreciate anything you feel you can do. He strode out, the particulars falling in behind him. You all right, Clive? Said the captain. Only the whites of the Major's eyes were showing. What a horrible man, said the Major quietly. Yes, of course. On the other hand... Yes, I know. We have no choice. We have orders. That weasel is right. If the damn thing is there in the morning, I've got no career and nor have you. Show of strength, frontal attack, take no prisoners. That's what our orders are. Stupid orders, he sighed. I suppose we could disobey, said the captain. Are you mad? And then what would we be? Don't be a fool, Tom. Muster the men, get the ox teams hitched up. Let's make a bit of a show for the sake of it. Let's just get it over with. Vimes was shaken awake. He looked up into his own face, younger, less lined, more terrified. What? They're bringing up siege weapons, Sarge. They're coming down the street, Sarge. What? That's stupid. The barricade is highest here. A couple of men could defend it. Vimes leapt to his feet. It must be a feint. A stupid feint, too. Just here, Waddy and his mates had wedged 2 big carts across the road, and they'd become the nucleus of a solid wall of wood and rubble. But there was a narrow, low entrance for people to come through, which let them into the Republic with their head at just the right height for a gentle tap if they turned out to be a soldier. People were scrambling through now like rats. Vimes climbed up the barricade and looked over the top. At the far end of the street, a big metal wall was advancing, surrounded by flaming torches. That was all there was to see in a city without lights, but he knew what it was. It was called Big Mary, and it was mounted on a heavy cart. Vimes had seen it before. There would be a couple of oxen behind the cart pushing it. The walls weren't solid metal, but merely a skin to stop defenders throwing fire at the wooden planks underneath. And the whole thing was simply to defend the men who, behind that cosy shelter, had the big hooks on the end of the long chains. They'd fix them in the barricade, and the oxen would be turned around in the traces, and maybe another 4 beasts would be added, and then there was nothing you could build of wood that wouldn't be pulled apart. Between the cart and the barricade, struggling to escape from the crush, was a mass of frightened people. You got any orders, Sarge? Said Fred Colon, pulling himself up alongside Vimes. He looked up the street. Oh dear, he said. Yeah, this is when you need a couple of trolls on the force, said Vimes. I reckon the trolls? Huh, wouldn't work with any trolls, said Colon. Too thick to take orders. You'll find out one day, thought Vimes, and said aloud, OK, anyone that can't or shouldn't have a weapon, they get back as far as possible, right? Get a message to Dickens, tell him we'll need anyone he can spare, but blast it. What had happened before? There'd been a lot of activity against the barricades, but it had been a feint while the cavalry were sneaking around outside. He didn't remember this. He glanced at the oncoming wagon. At the top of the wobbling wall, on the other side, there was generally a narrow ledge for bowmen to stand and fire down at anyone trying to interfere with the demolition men. In the treacherous light of the torches, Vimes thought he saw the features of Carcer. Even at this distance, there was something horribly recognizable about that expression. Swing was dead. and when everyone's running around in confusion, a man who is firm of purpose can push his way up by sheer nerve. After all, Vimes thought, I did. He clambered down the barricade and looked at the men. I want to volunteer. No, not you, Sam. Wiglet, you'll do. Your dad's a carpenter, right? Well, there's a carpenter's shop around the corner. Run and get me a couple of mallets and some wooden wedges or long nails, something spiky. Go, 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 go. Wiglet nodded and ran off. And let's see, I need 2 pennyworth of fresh ginger. Nancy Ball, nip around the corner to the apothecary, will you? What's that any good for, Sarge? Said Sam. Gingering things up. Vimes removed his helmet and armour and nodded to the gap through which people were streaming. Fred, we'll be going out that way. Think you can push us a path? I'll give it a go, Sarge. Fred squared his shoulders. We're going to stop that thing. They can't move it fast, and with all this noise and confusion, no one will notice a thing. That was quick, Billy. I just grabbed everything, Sarge, panted Wiglet, running up with a small sack. I know what you want to do, Sarge. I did it sometimes out of mischief when I was a kid. Me too, said Vimes. And here's my ginger. Ah, lovely. It brings tears to my eyes. OK, Billy, ready, Fred. It took all of Colon's bulk, with Vimes pushing behind him, to thrust a way through the desperate mob into the world beyond the barricade. In the darkness, Vimes forced his way between the bodies up to the side of the siege machine. It was like a huge, slow ram pushing its way down the streets, but jerking forward, slower than a walking pace because of the press of people. Vimes fancied that Carcer probably enjoyed this ride. He ducked under the cart, unseen in the mob, and grabbed a mallet and a wedge from Wiglet's bag. You do the left rear wheel, and then make a run for it, Billy, he said. But, Sarge, that was an order. Get out, get back, get people off the street as fast as possible, do it. Vimes crawled up to one of the front wheels and held the wedge ready between wheel and axle. The cart stopped for a moment, and he thrust the wedge into the gap and thumped it with the hammer. He had time for another blow before the cart gave a creak that suggested the oxen were pushing again. Then he crawled back quickly and took the sack from Billy before the little man, with a reluctant glance, scuttled out into the forest of legs. Vimes got a third wedge in before loud voices somewhere behind him indicated that the lack of progress had been noticed. The wheels rocked and bound even further on the wedges. The wheels would have to come off before they could be got out. Even so, oxen were powerful beasts. Enough of them would have no problem at all in dragging the cart as well as the barricade. And the nice thing was that people thought of a barricade as something people tried to get into, not out of. Vimes slipped out into the noisy, confusing night. There were soldiers and watchmen and refugees, all cursing at cross purposes. In the flickering shadows, Vimes was just another shape. He pushed his way confidently around to the straining oxen and their driver, who was prodding them with a stick. He was heartened by the fact that the man looked the kind of man who'd get 6 out of 10 when answering the question, "What is your name?" Vimes didn't even stop. The important thing was not to let the other person have a chance to say, "But," let alone, "Who the hell do you think you are?" He pushed the man aside and glared at the sweating beasts. "Ah, right, I see your problem right here," he said, in the voice of one who knows everything there is to know about oxen. "They've got the glaggies, but we can fix that. Hold up that one's tail. Hurry up, man." The ox poker responded to the voice of authority. Vimes palmed a lump of ginger. Here goes, he thought. At least it's somewhere warm on a cold night. OK, now the other one. Right. OK. Now I'll just go around and, said Vimes, hurrying back into the shadows. He shouldered his way through the throng and dived through a tiny hole. "It's all right, Sarge. I spied you coming through Mrs. Rutherford's dining-room chairs," said Fred Colon, hauling him upright. "Well, you stopped it, Sarge, no mistake. You really... Yeah, don't shake hands with me until I've had a wash," said Vimes, heading for the pump. He kept an ear cocked for any strange noises on the other side of the barricade. There were none for several seconds, and then he heard it. Nothing much had happened for some while after his visit to the oxen, except that very slowly their eyes had begun to cross, and then, also quite slowly, turn red. It takes a long time for anything to happen inside the head of an ox, but when it does, it happens extensively. The moo started off low and rose slowly, It was a visceral sound that had rolled across the ancient tundra and told early man that here came dinner or death, and either way it was pissed. It was the sound of a big beast that was still too small to restrain all the emotions that were welling up inside it. And it was a duet. Vimes, hauling himself up the barricade, saw people running. Then the whole of Big Mary shuddered. That didn't look too impressive unless you knew that a couple of tons of wood had just jumped sideways. Then there was a sound of splintering. Two of Big Mary's locked wheels collapsed, and she toppled sideways in a mass of flame, splinters, smoke, and dust. Vimes counted under his breath, and had only reached 2 when a cartwheel rolled out of the smoke and away down the road. This always happens. It wasn't over, though. The oxen, tangled in the remains of the shafts and harness, and now an enraged joint creature that could only get 6 legs out of 8 on the ground, headed erratically but with surprising speed in the opposite direction. The other oxen, which had been waiting for the big pull, watched it approach. They were already spooked by the crash, and now they caught the stink of terror and fury and began a slow stampede away from it and towards, as it turned out, the waiting bowmen behind them, who in turn tried to run into the cavalry. The horses were not inclined to be well behaved towards armed men in any case, and were also in a state of some apprehension. They relieved this by kicking the hell out of anyone close. It was hard for the watchers along the barricade to see much of what happened after that, but the noises were very interesting for quite some time. Sergeant Colon's mouth shut. "Bloody hell, Sarge," he said admiringly. In the distance, glass shattered. "They'll be back," said Vimes. "Yep, but not all of them," said Wiglet. "Well done, Sarge." Vimes turned and saw Sam staring at him in wide-eyed hero worship. "I was lucky, lad," he said, "but it helps to remember little details and not mind getting your hands dirty." "But we could win now, Sarge," said Sam. "No, we can't, but we can put off losing until it doesn't hurt too much." Vimes turned to the others. "Right, lads, back to work. We've had some fun, but dawn's a long way off." The news had got around even before he'd climbed down from the barricade. There was a cheer from the crowd and a general struttiness about the armed men. "We'd shown them, eh? They don't like the taste of cold steel, those, other people from Ankh-Morpork. We'll show them, eh?" And it had taken a few wedges, some raw ginger, and a lot of luck. That wouldn't happen twice. Maybe it didn't need to. He remembered hearing about the assassination. It was all very mysterious. Winder had been killed in a room full of people, and no one saw a thing. Magic had been suggested and hotly denied by the wizards. Some historians had said that it happened because troops around the palace had been sent out to attack the barricades, but that didn't answer the question. Anyone who could stab a man to death in a brightly lit room full of people surely wouldn't find some guards in the darkness any kind of obstacle. Of course, with Snapcase as new patrician, no one had tried very hard to establish the facts in any case. People had said things like, "Quite possibly we shall never know the truth," which meant, in Vimes's personal lexicon, "I know, or I think I know what the truth is, and hope like hell it doesn't come out because things are all smoothed over now." Supposing we don't lose. Keel hadn't killed Big Mary. She hadn't been used in the other present. The soldiers hadn't been stupid enough to try it. That sort of thing was okay to deal with little local affairs manned by civilians, but it was a joke if you put it up against stout defences manned by professionals. Now she was a wreck. The attackers would have to think up a new plan in a hurry, and time was moving on. Supposing we don't lose. All they had to do was hold out. The people at the top had very short memories. Winder is mysteriously dead, long live Lord Snapcase. And suddenly, all the rebels become glorious freedom fighters, and there's 7 unfilled graves in the cemetery. Would he be able to go back then? Supposing Madam was right and he got offered the post of commander, not as a bribe, but because he'd earned it. That had changed history. He took out the cigar case and stared hard at the inscription. Let's see, he thought. If I never met Sybil, we wouldn't get married, and she wouldn't buy me this, and so I couldn't be looking at it. He stared hard at the curly engraving, almost willing it to disappear. It didn't. On the other hand, that old monk had said that whatever happens stays happened. And now Vimes had a mental picture of Sybil and Carrot and Detritus and all the rest of them frozen in a moment that would never have a next moment. He wanted to go home. He wanted it so much that he trembled at the thought. But if the price of that was selling good men to the night, if the price was filling those graves, if the price was not fighting with every trick he knew, then that was too high. It wasn't a decision he was making, he knew that. It was happening far below the areas of the brain that made decisions. It was something built in. There was no universe anywhere where a Sam Vimes would give in on this, because if he did, then he wouldn't be Sam Vimes anymore. The writing stayed on the silver, but it was blurred now because of the tears welling up. They were tears of anger, mostly at himself. There was not a thing that he could do. He hadn't bought a ticket, and he hadn't wanted to come, but now he was on the ride and couldn't get off till the end. What else had the old monk said? History finds a way. Well, it was going to have to come up with something good, because it was up against Sam Vimes now. He glanced up and saw young Sam watching him. "You okay, Sarge?" Fine. Only you've been sitting there for 20 minutes looking at your cigars." Vimes coughed and tucked the case away and pulled himself together. "Half the pleasure's in the anticipation," he said. The night wore on. News came through from barricades at bridges and gates. There were forays, more to test the defenders' strength of will than to make a serious dent in the defences. And there were more deserters. One reason for the desertion rate was that those people of a practical turn of mind were working out the subtle economics. The Republic of Treacle-Mine Road lacked all the big, important buildings in the city, the ones that traditional rebels were supposed to take. It had no government offices, no banks, and very few temples. It was almost completely bereft of important civic architecture. All it had was the unimportant stuff. It had the entire slaughterhouse district, and the butter market, and the cheese market. It had the tobacco factors, and the candle makers, and most of the fruit and vegetable warehouses, and the grain and flour stores. This meant that while the Republicans were being starved of important things like government, banking services and salvation, they were self-sufficient in terms of humdrum everyday things like food and drink. People are content to wait a long time for salvation, but prefer dinner to turn up inside an hour. "A present from the lads down to Shambles, Sarge," said Dickens, arriving with a wagon. "They said it'd only spoil otherwise. Is it okay to dish 'em out to the field kitchens?" "What have you got?" said Vimes. "Steaks, mostly," said the old sergeant, grinning. "But I'd liberate the sack of onions in the name of the Revolution." He saw Vimes's expression change. "No, Sarge, the man gave them to me, see? They needed eating, he said." "What did I tell you? Every meal will be a feast in the People's Republic," said Red Shoe, striding up. He still hung on to his clipboard. People like Reg tend to. "If you could just take it along to the official warehouse, Sergeant." "What warehouse?" Reg sighed. "All food must go to the common warehouse and be distributed by my officials according to—" "Mr. Shoe," said Dickens, "there's a cart with 500 chickens coming up behind me, and there's another full of eggs. There's nowhere to send them, see? The butchers have filled up the ice houses and smoke rooms, and the only place we can store this grub is in our guts. I ain't particularly bothered about officials." "On behalf of the Republic, I order you," Reg began, and Vimes put his hand on his shoulder. "Off you go, Sergeant," he said, nodding to Dickens. "A word in your ear, Reg." "Is this a military coup?" said Reg uncertainly, holding his clipboard. "No, it's just that we're under siege here, Reg. This is not the time. Let Sergeant Dickens sort it out. He's a fair man, he just doesn't like clipboards." "But supposing people get left out," said Reg. "There's enough for everyone to eat themselves sick, Reg." Reg Shoe looked uncertain and disappointed, as though this prospect was less pleasing than carefully rationed scarcity. "But I'll tell you what," said Vimes. "If this goes on, the city will make sure the deliveries come in by other gates. We'll be hungry then. That's when we'll need your organisational skills." "You mean we'll be in a famine situation?" said Reg, the light of hope in his eyes. "If we aren't, Reg, I'm sure you could organise one," said Vimes, and realised he'd gone just a bit too far. Reg was only stupid in certain areas, and now he looked as though he was going to cry. "I just think it's important to be fair," the man began. "Yeah, Reg, I understand. But there's a time and a place, you know? Maybe the best way to build a bright new world is to peel some spuds in this one. Now off you go. And you, Lance Constable Vimes, you go and help him." Vimes climbed back up the barricade. The city beyond was dark again, with only the occasional chink of light from a shuttered window. By comparison, the streets of the Republic were ablaze. In a few hours, the shops out there were expecting deliveries, and they weren't going to arrive. The government couldn't sit this one out. A city like Ankh-Morpork was only 2 meals away from chaos at the best of times. Every day, maybe 100 cows died for Ankh-Morpork. So did a flock of sheep and a herd of pigs, and the gods alone knew how many ducks, chickens, and geese. Flour? He'd heard it was 80 tons, and about the same amount of potatoes and maybe 20 tons of herring. He didn't particularly want to know this kind of thing, but once you started having to sort out the everlasting traffic problem, these were facts that got handed to you. Every day, 40,000 eggs were laid for the city. Every day, hundreds. Thousands of carts and boats and barges converged on the city with fish and honey and oysters and olives and eels and lobsters. And then think of the horses dragging this stuff, and the windmills, and the wool coming in too every day, the cloth, the tobacco, the spices, the ore, the timber, the cheese, the coal, the fat, the tallow, the hay, every damn day. And that was now. Back home, the city was twice as big. Against the dark screen of night, Vimes had a vision of Ankh-Morpork. It wasn't a city. It was a process. A weight on the world that distorted the land for hundreds of miles around. People who'd never see it in their whole life nevertheless spent their life working for it. Thousands and thousands of green acres were part of it. Forests were part of it. It drew in and consumed, and gave back the dung from its pens and the soot from its chimneys and steel and saucepans and all the tools by which its food was made, and also clothes and fashions and ideas and interesting vices, songs and knowledge, and something which, if looked at in the right light, was called civilization. That's what civilization meant. It meant the city. Was anyone else out there thinking about this? A lot of the stuff came in through the Onion Gate and the Shambling Gate, both now Republican and solidly locked. There'd be a military picket on them, surely. Right now there were carts on the way that'd find those gates closed to them. Yet no matter what the politics, eggs hatch and milk sours and herds of driven animals need penning and watering, and where was that going to happen? Would the military sort it out? Well, would they? While the carts rumbled up, and then they were hemmed in by the carts behind, and the pigs escaped and the cattle herds wandered off? Was anyone important thinking about this? Suddenly, the machine was wobbling, but Winder and his cronies didn't think about the machine, they thought about money. Meat and drink came from servants. They happened. Vetinari, Vimes realized, thought about this sort of thing all the time. The Ankh-Morpork back home was twice as big and 4 times as vulnerable. He wouldn't have let something like this happen. Little wheels must spin so that the machine can turn, he'd say. But now, in the dark, it all spun on Vimes. If the man breaks down, it all breaks down, he thought. The whole machine breaks down, and it goes on breaking down, and it breaks down the people. Behind him, he heard a relief squad marching down Hero Street. How do they rise? They rise knees up, knees up, knees up. They rise knees up high. All the little angels. For a moment, Vimes wondered, looking out through a gap in the furniture, if there wasn't something in Fred's idea about moving the barricades on and on, like a sort of sieve, street by street. You could let through the decent people and push the bastards, the rich bullies, the wheelers and dealers in people's fates, the leeches, the hangers-on, the brown-nosers and the courtiers and smarmy plump devils in expensive clothes, all those people who didn't know or care about the machine but stole its grease, push them into a smaller and smaller compass and then leave them in there. Maybe you could toss some food in every couple of days, or maybe you could leave them to do what they've always done, which was live off other people. There wasn't much noise from the dark streets. Vimes wondered what was going on. He wondered if anyone out there was taking care of business. Major Mountjoy Standfast stared empty-eyed at the damn map. "How many, then?" he said. 32 men injured, sir, and another 20 probably desertions," said Captain Wrangle. "And Big Mary is firewood, of course." "Oh, gods!" "Do you want to hear the rest, sir?" "There's more." "I'm afraid there is, sir. Before the remains of Big Mary left Hero Street, sir, she smashed 20 shop windows and various carts, doing damage estimated at— "Fortunes of war, Captain, we can't help that." "No, sir," the captain coughed. "Do you want to know what happened next, sir?" "Next? There was next?" said the Major. Yes, sir. Quite a lot of next, actually, sir. The 3 gates through which most of the agricultural produce comes into the city are picketed, sir, on your orders, so the carters and drovers are bringing their stuff in along Short Street, sir. Fortunately, not too many animals at this time of night, sir, but there were 6 millers' wagons, 1 wagon of dried fruits and spices, 4 dairymen's wagons, and 3 hegglers' carts, all wrecked, sir. Those oxen really were very feisty, sir." "Hegglers? What the hell are hegglers?" said the Major, bewildered. "Egg marketers, sir. They travel around the farms, pick up the eggs." "Yes, all right. And what are we supposed to do?" "We could make an enormous cake, sir." "Tom!" "Sorry, sir." "But the city doesn't stop, you see. It's not like a battlefield. The best place for urban fighting is right out in the countryside, sir, where there's nothing else in the way." "It's a bloody big barricade, Tom. Too well defended. We can't even set fire to the damn thing. It'd take the city up with it." "Yes, sir. And the point is, sir, that they're not actually doing anything, sir, except being there." "What do you mean?" "They're even putting old grannies up on the barricades, shouting down to the lads. Poor Sergeant Franklin, sir, his granny saw him and said that if he didn't turn it up, she'd tell everyone what he did when he was 11, sir." "The men are armed, aren't they?" said the Major, wiping his forehead. "Oh, yes. But we've kind of advised them not to shoot unarmed old ladies, sir. We don't want another Dolly Sisters, do we, sir?" The Major stared at the map. There was a solution, he felt. "Well, what did Sergeant Franklin do when he was, he said absent-mindedly. "She didn't say, sir." A sudden feeling of relief stole over the Major. "Captain, you know what this is now?" "I'm sure you'll tell me, sir." "I will, Tom, I will. This is political, Tom. We're soldiers. Political goes higher up." "You're right, sir. Well done, sir." "Dig out a lieutenant who's been a bit slack lately and send him up to tell their lordships," said the Major. "Isn't that a bit cruel, sir?" "Of course it is. This is politics now." Lord Albert Salachi didn't much like parties. There was too much politics, and he particularly didn't like this one because it meant he was in the same room as Lord Winder, a man who deep down he believed to be a bad sort. In his personal vocabulary there was no greater condemnation. What made it worse was that while seeking to avoid him, he also had to try at the same time to avoid Lord Venturi. Their families cordially detested one another. Lord Albert wasn't sure now what event in history had caused the rift, but it must have been important, obviously, otherwise it would be silly to go on like this. Had the Salachi and the Venturi been hill clans, they would have been a feud-in and a fight-in. Since they were 2 of the city's leading families, they were chillingly, viciously, icily polite to each other whenever social fate forced them together. And right now his careful orbit of the less dangerously political areas of the damn party had brought him face to face with Lord Charles Venturi. It was bad enough having to campaign with the fellow, he thought, without being forced to talk to him over some rather inferior wine, but currently the party's tides offered no way of escape without being impolite. And, curiously, upper-class etiquette in Ankh-Morpork held that, while you could snub your friends any time you felt like it, it was the height of bad form to be impolite to your worst enemy. "Venturi," he said, raising his glass a carefully calculated fraction of an inch. "Salachi," said Lord Venturi, doing the same thing. "This is a party," said Albert. "Indeed, I see you are standing upright." "Indeed, so are you, I see." "Indeed, indeed. On that subject, I note many others are doing the same thing." "Which is not to say that the horizontal position does not have its merits when it comes to, for example, sleeping," said Albert. "Quite so. Obviously, that would not be done here." "Oh, indeed, indeed." The Solaci and the Venturi made a point on occasions like this to talk only about things on which there was no possibility of disagreement. Given the history of the two families, this had become a very small number of things. A brisk lady in a magnificent purple dress advanced across the ballroom floor, her smile travelling in front of her. "Lord Solaci," she said, proffering her hand, "I hear you have been doing sterling work defending us from the mob." His lordship, on social automatic pilot, bowed stiffly. He wasn't used to forward women, and this one was all forward. However, all safe topics of conversation with the Venturi had been exhausted. "I fear you have the advantage of me, madam," he murmured. "I certainly expect so," said madam, giving him such a radiant smile that he didn't analyse her actual words. "And who is this imposing military gentleman? A comrade in arms?" Lord Solaci floundered. He'd been brought up knowing that you always introduced men to women, and this smiling lady hadn't told him her. "Lady Roberta Meserole," she said. "Most people who know me call me madam, but my friends call me Bobby." Lord Venturi clicked his heels. He was quicker on the uptake than his comrade-in-arms, and his wife told him more of the current gossip. "Ah, must be the lady from Genua," he said, taking her hand. "I have heard so much about you." "Anything good?" said madam. His lordship glanced across the room. His wife appeared to be deep in conversation. He knew to his cost that her wifely radar could fry an egg half a mile away, but the champagne had been good. "Mostly expensive," he said, which didn't sound quite as witty as he intended. She laughed anyway. Perhaps I was witty, he thought. I say, this champagne really is excellent. "A woman has to make her way in the world as best she can," she said. "May I make so bold as to ask if there is a Lord Meserole?" he said. "So early in the evening?" said madam, and laughed again. Lord Venturi found himself laughing with her. My word, he told himself, this wit is a lot easier than I thought. "No, of course, I meant—" he began. "I'm sure you did," said madam, tapping him lightly with her fan. "Now, I mustn't monopolise you, but I really must drag both of you away to talk to some of my friends." She took Lord Venturi by the unresisting arm and piloted him across the floor. Solaci followed morosely, being of the opinion that when respectable women called themselves Bobby, the world was about to end, and ought to. "Mr. Carter has extensive interests in copper, and Mr. Jones is very interested in rubber," she whispered. There were about 6 men in the group, talking in low voices. As their lordships approached, they caught, "And at a time like this, one really must ask oneself where one's true loyalties lie. Oh, good evening, madam." On her apparently random walk to the buffet table, madam happened to meet several other gentlemen and, like a good hostess, piloted them in the direction of other small groups. Probably only someone lying on the huge beams that spanned the hall high above would spot any pattern, and even then they'd have to know the code. If they had been in a position to put a red spot on the heads of those people who were not friends of the patrician, and a white spot on those who were his cronies, and a pink spot on those who were perennial waverers, then they would have seen something like a dance taking place. There were not many whites. They would have seen that there were several groups of reds, and white spots were being introduced into them in ones or twos if the number of reds in the group was large enough. If a white left a group, he or she was effortlessly scooped up and shunted into another conversation which might contain 1 or 2 pinks, but was largely red. Any conversation entirely between white spots was gently broken up with a smile and an "Oh, but now you must meet," or was joined by several red spots. Pinks, meanwhile, were delicately passed from red group to red group until they were deeply pink, and then they were allowed to mix with other pinks of the same hue under the supervision of a red. In short, the pinks met so many reds and so few whites that they probably forgot about whites at all, while the whites, constantly alone or hugely outnumbered by reds or deep pinks, appeared to be going red out of embarrassment or a desire to blend in. Lord Winder was entirely surrounded by reds, leaving the few remaining whites out in the cold. He looked like all the patricians tended to look after a certain time in office, unpleasantly plump, with the pink jowliness of a man of normal build who had too much rich food. He was sweating slightly in this quite cool room, and his eyes swivelled this way and that, looking for the flaws, the clues, the angles. At last, Madam reached the buffet, where Dr. Follett was helping himself to the devilled eggs, and Miss Rosemary Palm was debating with herself as to whether the future should contain strange pastry things with a green filling that hinted mysteriously of prawn.
"And how are we doing, do you think?" said Dr. Follett, apparently to a swan carved out of ice.
"We are doing well," Madam told a basket of fruit. "There's 4, however, that are still proving awkward."
"I know them," said the doctor. "They'll fall into place, trust me. What else can they do? We're used to this game here. We know that if you complain too loudly when you lose, you might not be asked to play again. But I shall station some stout friends near them, just in case their resolve needs a little bolstering."
"He is suspicious," said Miss Palm.
"When isn't he?" said Dr. Follett. "Go and talk to him."
"Where is our new best friend, Doctor?" said Madam.
"Mr. Snapcase is dining quietly but visibly in impeccable company some way away."
They turned when the double doors opened. So did several of the other guests, and then turned back hastily. But it was only a servant, who hurried over to Madam and whispered something. She indicated the 2 military commanders, and the man went over to hover anxiously beside them. There was a brief exchange, and then, without even a bow towards Lord Winder, all 3 men went out. "I shall just go and see to the arrangements," said Madam, and without in any sense following the men, headed towards the doors. When she stepped into the hall, the 2 servants waiting by the cake stopped lounging and snapped to attention, and a guard who was patrolling the corridor gave her a quick glance of interrogation. "Now, Madam?" said one of the servants. "What? Oh, no, just wait." She glided over to where the commanders were in animated conversation with a couple of junior officers, and took Lord Venturi's arm. "Oh, dear, Charles, are you leaving us so soon?" Lord Venturi didn't think of wondering how she knew his first name. The champagne had been plentiful, and he saw no reason at the moment why any attractive woman of a certain age shouldn't know his name. "Oh, there are 1 or 2 pockets of resistance left," he said. "Nothing to concern you, Madam."
"Bloody big pocket," murmured Lord Salachi into his moustache.
"They destroyed Big Mary, sir," said the luckless messenger, "and they—" "Major Mountjoy Standfast can't outthink a bunch of gormless watchmen and civilians and some veterans with garden forks," said Lord Venturi, who had no idea of how much damage a garden fork could do if hurled straight down from an elevation of 20 feet. "That's just it, sir. They are veterans, and they know all—" "And the civilians, unarmed civilians," said Venturi. The messenger, who was a sub-lieutenant and very nervous, couldn't find the right words to explain that unarmed civilian was stretching a point when it was a 200-pound slaughterhouse man with a long hook in one hand and a flensing knife in the other. Young men who joined up for the uniforms and a bed all to themselves did not expect that kind of treatment. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" he tried. "Very well." "The men haven't got the heart for it, sir. They'd kill a Clatchian in a wink, sir, but, well, some of the old soldiers are from the regiment, sir, and they're shouting down all kinds of stuff. A lot of the men come from down there, and it's not good for them. And what some of the old ladies shout, sir, well, I've never heard such language. Dolly's sisters was bad enough, sir, but this is a bit too much. Sorry, sir." Their lordships looked out the window. There was half a regiment in the palace grounds, men who'd had nothing to do for several days but stand guard.
"Some backbone and a quick thrust," said Salachi. That's what's needed by Io. Lance the Boyle, this is not a cavalry action, Venturi, and I'll take those men, fresh blood.
Salaci, we do have orders.
We have all kinds of orders, said Salaci. But we know where the enemy is, don't we? Aren't there enough guards here? How many guards does one fool need?
We can't just... Lord Venturi began, but Madam said, I'm sure Charles will see that no harm comes to his lordship. And she took his arm. He does have his sword, after all. A few minutes later, Madam glanced out the window and saw that the troops were quietly moving out. She also noticed, after watching for some time, that the guard patrolling in the hall seemed to have vanished. There were rules. When you had a guild of assassins, there had to be rules which everyone knew and which were never, ever broken. Sometimes, admittedly, for a given value of never. An assassin, a real assassin, had to look like one. Black clothes, hood, boots and all. If they could wear any clothes, any disguise, then what could anyone do but spend all day sitting in a small room with a loaded crossbow pointed at the door? And they couldn't kill a man incapable of defending himself. Although a man worth more than 10,000 Ankh-Morpork dollars a year was considered automatically capable of defending himself, or at least of employing people to do it for him. And they had to give the target a chance. But there was no helping some people. It was regrettable how many rulers of the city had been inhumed by the men in black because they didn't recognize a chance when they saw it, didn't know when they'd gone too far, didn't care that they'd made too many enemies, didn't read the signs, didn't know when to walk away after embezzling a moderate and acceptable amount of cash. They didn't realize it when the machine had stopped, when the world was ripe for change, when it was time, in fact, to spend more time with their family in case they ended up spending it with their ancestors. Of course, the guild didn't inhume their rulers on their own behalf. There was a rule about that too. They were simply there when needed. There was a tradition once, far back in the past, called King of the Bean. A special dish was served to all the men of their clan on a certain day of the year. It contained one small, hard-baked bean, and whoever got the bean was, possibly after some dental attention, hailed as king. It was quite an inexpensive system, and it worked well, probably because the clever little bald men who actually ran things and paid some attention to possible candidates were experts at palming a bean into the right bowl. And while the crops ripened and the tribe thrived and the land was fertile, the king thrived too. But when, in the fullness of time, crops failed, and the ice came back and the animals were inexplicably barren, the clever little bald men sharpened their long knives, which were mostly used for cutting mistletoe. And on the due night, one of them went into his cave and carefully baked one small bean. Of course, that was before people were civilized. These days, no one had to eat beans. People were still working on the barricade. It had become a sort of general hobby, a kind of group home improvement. Fire buckets, some full of water, some of sand, had turned up. In places the barricade was more impregnable than the city walls, considering how often the latter had been pillaged for stone. There were occasional drum beats down in the city, and the sound of troop movements. "Sergeant?" Vimes looked down. A face had appeared at the top of the ladder leading down into the street. "Ah, Miss Batty, I didn't know you were with us." "I didn't intend to be, but suddenly there was this big wall." She climbed all the way up. She was holding a small bucket. "Dr. Lorne presents his compliments and says how come you haven't beaten anyone up yet?" She said, putting it down. "He says he's got 3 tables scrubbed, 2 buckets of tar on the boil, 6 ladies rolling bandages, and all he's had to deal with so far is a nosebleed. You've let him down, he says." "Tell him ha ha ha," said Vimes. "I've brought you up some breakfast," said Sandra, and Vimes realized that down below, doing their not very best to remain unseen, were some of the lads. They were sniggering. "Mushrooms?" he said. "No," said the girl. "I was told to tell you that since it's tomorrow, you're going to get everything you wished for." For a moment Vimes tensed, not certain where the world was taking him. "A hard-boiled egg," said Sandra. "And Sam Vimes said you probably like the yolk runny and some toast cut up into soldiers." "Just like he does," said Vimes weakly. "Good guess, that man." Vimes tossed the egg up into the air, expecting to catch it when it came down. Instead, there was a noise like scissors closing, and the air rained runny yolk and bits of shell. And then it rained arrows. The noise level of the conversation had gone up. Madame moved in on the group around Lord Winder. Magically, within 10 seconds, they were left alone as all the other people in the group saw people across the room that they really had to talk to.
"Who are you?"
said Winder, his eyes surveying her with that care a man takes when he fears that a woman is carrying concealed weaponry. "Madame Roberta Meserole, my lord."
"The one from Genoa?"
Winder snorted, which was his attempt at a snigger.
"I've heard stories about Genoa."
"I could probably tell you a few more, my lord," said Madame. "But right now it's time for the cake."
"Yeah," said Winder. "Did you know we got another assassin tonight? They keep trying, you know. 11 years and still they try, but I get 'em every time, sneak about though they may."
"Well done, my lord," said Madame. It did help that he was an unpleasant person, ugly clear to the bone. In some ways it made things easier. She turned and clapped her hands. Surprisingly, this small noise caused a sudden cessation in the chatter. The double doors at the end of the hall opened and 2 trumpeters appeared. They took up positions on either side of the door.
"Stop 'em!"
Winder yelled and ducked. His 2 guards ran down the hall and grabbed the trumpets from the frightened men. They handled them with extreme care, as if expecting them to explode or issue a strange gas.
"Poison darts,"
said Winder in a satisfied voice.
"Can't be too careful, madam. In this job you learn to watch every shadow. All right, let 'em play, but no trumpets. I hate tubes pointed at me."
There was some bewildered conversation at the other end of the hall. Then the bereft trumpeters stood back and whistled as best they could. Lord Winder laughed as the cake was pushed in. It was in tiers about man-height and heavily iced.
"Lovely," he said as the crowd clapped. "I do like some entertainment at a party, and I cut it, do I?"
He took a few steps back and nodded at the bodyguards.
"Off you go, boys," he said.
Swords stabbed into the top tier several times. The guards looked at Winder and shook their heads.
"There's such a thing as dwarfs, you know," he said.
They stabbed at the second layer, again meeting no more resistance than can be offered by dried fruit and suet and a crust of marzipan with sugar frosting.
"He could be kneeling down,"
said Winder. The audience watched, their smiles frozen. When it became clear that the cake was solid and unoccupied, the food taster was sent for. Most of the guests recognized him. His name was Spy Mold. He was said to have eaten so much poison in his time that he was proof against anything, and that he ate a toad every day to keep in condition. It was also rumoured that he could turn silver black by breathing on it. He selected a piece of cake and chewed it thoughtfully, staring intently upwards whilst he did so. He said after a while.
"Well?"
said Winder.
"Sorry, my lord," said Spy Mold. "Nothing. I thought there was a touch of cyanide there, but no luck, it's just the almonds." "No poison at all?" said the patrician. "You mean it's edible?"
"Well, yes. It'd be all the better for some toad, of course, but that's just one man's opinion."
"Perhaps the servants can serve it now, my lord," said Madame.
"Don't trust servants serving food," said Winder. "Sneaking about. Could slip something in."
"Do you mind if I do it then, my lord?"
"Yeah, all right," said
Lord Winder, watching the cake carefully.
"I'll have the 9th piece they cut."
But in fact, he snatched the 5th piece triumphantly, as if saving something precious from the wreckage. The cake was disassembled. Lord Winder's objection to servants handling food withered once the food was headed for other people, and so the party spread out a little as the guests pondered the ancient question of how to hold a plate and a glass and eat at the same time without using one of those little glass holding things that clip on the side of the plate and make the user look as though they're 4 years old. This takes a lot of concentration, and that might have been why everyone was so curiously self-absorbed. The door opened. A figure walked into the room. Winder looked up over the top of his plate. It was a slim figure, hooded and masked, all in black. Winder stared, Around him the conversation rose, and a watcher above might have noticed that the drift of the party tides was such that they were leaving a wide, empty path stretching from the door all the way to Winder, whose legs didn't want to move. As it strolled towards him, the figure reached both hands behind it, and they came back, each holding a small pistol bow. There were a couple of small tick noises, and the bodyguards collapsed gently towards the floor. Then it tossed the bows behind it and kept coming. Its footfalls made no sound. Said Winder, staring. His mouth was open and stuffed with cake. People chattered on. Somewhere, someone had told a joke. There was laughter, perhaps a shade shriller than might normally be the case. The noise level rose again. Winder blinked. Assassins didn't do this. They snuck around. They used the shadows. This didn't happen in real life. This was how it happened in dreams. And now the creature was in front of him. He dropped his spoon, and there was a sudden silence after it clanged on the ground. There was another rule. Wherever possible, the inhumed should be told who the assassin was and who had sent him. It was felt by the guild that this was only fair. Winder did not know this, and it was not widely advertised, but nevertheless, in the midst of terror, eyes wide, he asked the questions. "Who sent you?" "I come from the city," said the figure, drawing a thin, silvery sword. "Who are you?" "Think of me as your future." The figure drew the sword back, but it was too late. Terror's own, more subtle knife had done its work. Winder's face was crimson, his eyes were staring at nothing, and coming up from the throat, through the crumbs of cake, was a sound that merged a creak with a sigh. The dark figure lowered its sword, watched for a moment in the echoing silence, and then said, "Boo." It reached out one gloved hand and gave the patrician a push. Winder went over backwards, his plate dropping from his hand and shattering on the tiles. The assassin held his bloodless sword at arm's length and let it drop on the floor beside the corpse. Then he turned and walked slowly back across the marble floor. He shut the double doors behind him. Madame counted slowly to 10 before she screamed. That seemed long enough. Lord Winder got to his feet and looked up at the black-clad figure.
"Another one? Where did you creep in from?" "I do not creep."
Winder's mind felt even fuzzier than it had done over the past few years, but he was certain about cake. He'd been eating cake, and now there wasn't any. Through the mists he saw it, apparently close, but when he tried to reach it, a long way away. A certain realization dawned on him.
"Oh,"
he said.
"Yes,"
said Death.
"Not even time to finish my cake." "No, there is no more time, even for cake. For you, the cake is over. You have reached the end of cake."
A grapnel thudded into the wall beside Vimes. There were shouts along the barricade. More hooks snaked up and bit into the wood. Another rain of arrows clattered on the roofs of the houses. The attackers weren't ready to risk hitting their own side, but arrows were snapping and bouncing in the street below. Vimes heard shouts and the clang of arrows on armour. A sound made him turn. A helmeted head rose level with his, and the face beneath it blanched in terror when it saw Vimes. "That was my egg, you bastard!" he screamed, punching the nose. "With soldiers!" The man fell back, by the sound of it, onto other climbers. Men were yelling all along the parapet. Vimes pulled out his truncheon. "At 'em, lads!" he yelled. "Truncheons, nothing fancy. Bop 'em on the fingers and let gravity do the work. They're going down." He ducked, pressing close to the wood, and tried to find a spy hole. "They're using big catapults," said Sandra, who'd found a gap a few feet away. "There's a—" Vimes pulled her away. "What are you doing still up here?" he roared. "It's safer than the street," she yelled back, nose to nose with him. "Not if one of those grapnels hits you, it isn't." He grabbed his knife. "Here, take this. You see a rope anywhere, cut it." He scurried along behind the shelter of the wobbling parapet, but the defenders were doing very well. It wasn't exactly rocket magic in any case. The people at ground level were firing out through any crack they could find, and while aiming was not easy, it didn't need to be. There is nothing like the zip and zing of arrows around them to make people nervous at their work. And the climbers were too bunched up. They had to be. If they tried attacking on a broad front, there'd be 3 defenders to greet each man, so they were in one another's way, and every falling man would take a couple more down with him. And the barricade was full of little gaps and holes where a defender with a spear could seriously prod those trying to climb up the outside. This is stupid, Vimes thought. It'd take 1,000 men to break through, and that'd only be when the last 50 ran up the slope made of the bodies of all the rest of them. Someone out there is doing the old hit them at their strongest point to show 'em we mean business thinking. Ye gods, is this how we won our wars? So how would I have dealt with this? Well, I'd have said, Detritus, remove the barricade, and made sure the defenders heard me. That's what I would have done. End of problem. There was a scream from further along the parapet. A grapnel had caught one of the watchmen and pulled him hard against the wood. Vimes reached him in time to see a hook dragged into the man's body through breastplate and mail as an attacker hauled himself up. Vimes caught the man's sword arm in one hand and punched him with the other, letting him tumble into the melee below. The stricken watchman was Nancy Ball. His face was blue-white, his mouth opened and shut soundlessly, and blood pooled around his feet. It dripped through the planks. "Let's get the bloody thing out," Wiglet said, grabbing the hook. Vimes pushed him away as a couple of arrows hummed overhead. "That could do more damage. Call up some lads, take him down really carefully, and get him to lawn." Vimes snatched up Nancy Ball's truncheon and brought it down on the helmet of another struggling climber. "He's still breathing, Sarge?" said Wiglet. Right, said Vimes. It was amazing how willing people were to see life in the corpse of a friend. "So make yourself useful and get him down to the doctor." And speaking as one who'd seen some stricken men in his time, he mentally added, "And if Lorne can sort him out, he can start his own religion." A lucky attacker who'd achieved the top of the barricade and then found himself horribly alone slashed desperately at Vimes with his sword. Vimes turned back to business. Ankh-Morpork was good at this, and had become good at it without anyone ever discussing it. Things flowed rather than happened. That is, you'd sometimes have to look quite hard to find the point of change between "hasn't been done yet" and "already taken care of, old boy." And that was how it was done. Things were taken care of. It was 20 minutes before Mr. Snapcase arrived, and 25 minutes before he was duly sworn in as patrician, had magically become Lord Snapcase, and was sitting in the oblong office. This included the 1-minute silence for the late Lord Winder, whose body had been taken care of. A number of servants were shown the door without any great unpleasantness, and even Spymold was allowed to remove his toad farm in peace. But those who filled the grates and dusted the furniture and swept the floors stayed on, as they had stayed on before, because they seldom paid any attention to, or possibly didn't even know, who their lord was, and in any case were too useful and knew where the brooms were kept. Men come and go, but dust accumulates. And it was the morning of a new day which looked, seen from below, quite like the old ones. After a while, someone raised the question of fighting, which clearly needed to be taken care of. There were scuffles all along the barricade now, but they were going only one way. Siege ladders had been brought up, and at several places along the parapet men had managed to climb in, but they could never get enough in one place. There were far more defenders than attackers, and they weren't all men under arms. One thing Vimes was learning fast was the natural vindictiveness of old ladies, who had no sense of fair play when it came to fighting soldiers. Give a granny a spear and a hole to jab it through, and young men on the other side were in big trouble. And then there was Reg Shoe's inspired idea of the use of steak dinners as a weapon. The attackers did not come from homes where steak was ever on the table. Meat tended to be the flavouring, not the meal. But here and there, men who'd achieved the top of the ladders, in darkness, with the groans and yells of their unsuccessful comrades below them, had their weapons dragged from their hands by well-fed former colleagues who were not unkind and who directed them down the ladder inside for steak and eggs and roast chicken and a promise that every day would be like this come the revolution. Vimes didn't want that news to get out. in case there was a rush to invade. But the grannies, the neighbourhoods of the Republic were a natural recruiting ground for the regiments. It was also an area of big families and matriarchs whose word was family law. It had almost been cheating, putting them on the parapet with a megaphone during the lulls. "I knows you're out there, Ron. This is your Nan. You climb up one more time and you'll feel the back of my hand. I'll Rita sends her love and wants you to hurry home. Grandpa is feeling a lot better with the new ointment. Now stop being a silly boy." It was a dirty trick, and he was proud of it. Messages like that sapped a fighting spirit better than arrows. And then Vimes realised that there were no more men on the ropes and ladders. He could hear yells and groans below, but those soldiers who could stand were withdrawing to a safe distance. Now me, thought Vimes, I'd have gone down to the cellars of the houses near the street. Ankh-Morpork is all cellars, and I'd have chipped my way through the rotten walls, and half the cellars on this side of the barricades would have men in them now nice and snug. Admittedly, last night I had the men nail up and bar every cellar door they could find, but after all, I wouldn't be fighting me, now would I? He peered through a gap between planks and was amazed to see a man walking gingerly forward amongst the wreckage and the groaning men. He was carrying a white flag and stopped occasionally to wave it, but not to shout hurrah. When he was as close as possible to the barricade, he called up, "I say!" Behind his planking, Vimes shut his eyes. "Oh, gods," he thought. He called down, "Yeah, can we help you?" "Who are you?" "Sergeant Keel, Night Watch. And you?" "Sub-Lieutenant Harrop. We ask for a brief truce." "Why?" So that we can recover our wounded." The rules of war, Vimes thought. The field of honour. Good grief. "And then," he said. "Sorry?" "What happens after that? We start fighting again?" Hasn't anyone told you?" said the sub-lieutenant. "Told us what?" "We've just heard. Lord Winder is dead. Lord Snapcase is patrician." A cheer began among the nearby defenders and was taken up below. Vimes felt the relief rise, but he wouldn't be Vimes if he'd just let things lie. He called out, "So, would you like to change ends?" Sorry?" "I mean, would your chaps like to have a go at defending the barricade and we can try attacking it?" Vimes heard laughter from the defenders. There was a pause, then the young man said, Why?" "Because, correct me if I am wrong, we are now the loyal supporters of the official government, and you are the rebellious rump of a discredited administration. Am I right?" I think we did have, legitimate orders." "Heard of a man called Captain Swing?" Yes." "He thought he had legitimate orders too," said Vimes. Yes?
Boy, was he surprised. All right, a truce. We agree. Would you like my lads to give you a hand? We've got a doctor here, very good. I've yet to hear screaming."
Thank you, sir."
The young man saluted. Vimes saluted back. Then he relaxed and turned to the defenders. "OK, lads," he said. "Stand down. Steal 'em if you haven't got 'em." He shinned down the ladder. Well, then, that was it. It was over. Ring out bells, dance in streets. "Sarge, did you mean that about helping their mothers with their wounded?" said Sam, who was standing at the bottom of the ladder. "Well, it makes as much sense as anything else that's been happening," said Vimes. "They're city lads just like us. Not their fault they were given the wrong orders. And it messes with their heads," he thought. "Makes them wonder why all this is happening."
"Only Nancy Ball's dead, Sarge."
Vimes took a deep breath. He'd known it anyway, up there on the wobbling ramparts, but hearing it said aloud was still a shock. "I dare say there's a few of theirs who won't make it through to morning," he said.
"Yeah, but they were the enemy, Sarge."
"It's always worth thinking about who your enemy is," said Vimes, tugging at the barricade.
"How about the man who's trying to stick a sword into you?" said Sam.
"That's a good start," said Vimes, "but there are times when it pays to be a little less tightly focused." In the oblong office, Snapcase put his hands together and tapped his front teeth with his forefingers. Quite a lot of paperwork was spread in front of him.
What to do, he said thoughtfully.
A general amnesty as usual, my lord,
said Mr. Slant. Mr. Slant, as head of the Guild of Lawyers, had advised many leaders of the city. He was also a zombie, although this had, if anything, benefited his career. He was precedent. He knew how things should go.
Yes, of course, said Snapcase. A clean start, of course. No doubt there is a traditional form of words. In fact, my lord, I happen to have a copy right here.
Yes. Tell me about this barricade, though, will you? The one that was still standing? He looked up at the crowd assembled in the office.
You know about that, sir, said Follett.
I do have my own informants, you know, said Snapcase. It has caused rather a stir, has it not? Some fellow put together a rather smart defence force, cut us off from the vital organs of the city, broke up Captain Swing's organisation, and has withstood the best attacks that could be made against him. And he is a sergeant, I hear. May I suggest that a promotion is in order, said Madam. I was thinking exactly the same thing, said Snapcase, his little eyes gleaming. And then there is the question of his men. Loyal, are they? Apparently, sir, said Madam. She exchanged a puzzled glance with Dr. Follett. Snapcase sighed. On the other hand, a soldier can hardly be punished for loyalty to a senior officer, especially in these difficult times. There is no reason to take formal action against them. Eyes met again. They all felt it, the sense of the world slipping. But not Keel, however, said Snapcase, standing up and removing a snuff-box from his waistcoat pocket. Think about it, I pray you. What ruler could tolerate the existence of such a man? He did all that in just a few days? I dread to think what he might take it into his head to do tomorrow. These are delicate times. Are we to be hostage to every whim of a mere sergeant? We do not need someone like Keel doing things his way. Besides, you know, the particulars could have been useful to us. Suitably re-educated, obviously.
I thought you said you wanted to promote him,
said Dr. Follett bluntly. Lord Snapcase took a pinch of snuff and blinked once or twice. Yes, he said. Promote him, as they say, to glory. The crowd in the room were silent. One or two of its members were horrified. Some were impressed. You didn't stay at the top in Ankh-Morpork without developing a certain pragmatic approach to life, and Snapcase seemed to have got a grip on that with commendable speed. The barricade is coming down, said the patrician, shutting the snuff-box with a click.
Yes, my lord, said Dr. Follett. Because of the general amnesty, he added, just to make sure the word was repeated.
The Guild of Assassins had a code of honour as well as rules. It was an odd code, carefully constructed to fit their needs, but it was a code nonetheless. You didn't kill the unprotected or servants, you did it up close, and you kept your word. This was appalling. Capital, said Snapcase. Ideal time. Streets full, much confusion. Unreconstructed elements, vital message not passed on, left hand not knowing what right hand doing, difficulties of the situation regrettable. No, my dear doctor, I do not intend to make any demands of your guild. Fortunately, there are those whose loyalty to the city is a little less conditional. Yes. And now, please, there is much to be done. I shall look forward to meeting you all later. The crowd were ushered politely but firmly out of the room, and the doors shut behind them.
It seems we're back at school,
muttered Dr. Follett as they were swept along the corridor.
Ave duci novo, similis duci seneci,
murmured Mr. Slant, dryly as only a zombie can manage.
Or, as we used to say at school, Ave bossa nova, similis bossa Seneca.
He gave a little schoolmasterly laugh. He felt at home with dead languages.
Of course, grammatically that is completely—"
"And that means?" said Madam.
"Here comes the new boss, same as the old boss," muttered Dr. Follett.
"I counsel patience," said Slant. "He's new in the job. He may settle into it. The city is good at working around problems. Give him time."
"And we want someone who's decisive," said someone in the hurrying crowd. "We wanted someone who decides the right things," said Madam. She elbowed her way to the front of the crowd, hurried down the main staircase, and darted into an anteroom. Miss Palm stood up as she came in. "Have they?" she began. "Where's Havelock?" Madam demanded. "Here," said Vetinari, detaching himself from a shadow by the curtains. "Take my coach. Find Keel. Warn him. Snapcase wants him dead. But where is—" Madam pointed a threatening, trembling finger. "Do it now, or receive an aunt's curse." When the doors were shut, Lord Snapcase stared at them for some moments, and then pressed the bell for his chief secretary. The man insinuated himself into the room via the private door. "Everyone is settling in," said Snapcase. "Yes, my lord, there are a number of matters for your attention." "I am sure people would like to believe there are," said Snapcase, leaning back in the chair. He shifted his weight from side to side. "Does this thing swivel?" "I believe not, sir, but I shall have a skilled swiveller here within the hour." "Good. Now, what was the other thing? Oh, yes. Tell me, are there any up-and-coming men at the Guild of Assassins?"
"I'm sure there are, my lord. Would you like me to prepare dossiers on, say, 3 of them?"
"Do it."
"Yes, my lord. My lord, various people are urgently seeking an audience with—"
"Let them wait. Now that we have the patricianship, we mean to enjoy it." Snapcase drummed his fingers on the edge of the desk for a moment, still staring at the doors. Then he said, "My inaugural speech is prepared. Very sorry, here unexpected death, winder, overwork, new direction, etc. Keep best of old while embracing best of new. Beware dangerous elements. Sacrifices must be made, etc. Pull together good of city."
"Exactly, sir."
"Add that I was particularly sad to hear tragic death Sergeant Keel. Hope that fitting memorial to him would be the uniting of citizens of all shades of opinion in an effort to, etc., etc." The secretary made a few notes.
"Quite, sir,"
he said. Snapcase smiled at him. "I expect you're wondering why I've taken you on, even though you worked for my predecessor, eh?" he said.
"No, sir,"
said the secretary without looking up. He wasn't wondering, firstly because he had a pretty good idea, and secondly because there were, in any case, things he found it safest not to wonder about. "It is because I recognize talent whenever it presents itself," said Snapcase.
"It is good of you to say so, sir,"
said the secretary smoothly. "Many a rough stone can be polished into a gem."
"Exactly, my lord,"
said the secretary, and he was thinking, "Exactly, my lord," too, because he'd also found there were things he found it safest not to think either, and these included phrases like, "What a little tit." "Where is my new captain of the guard?"
"I believe Captain Carcer is in the rear courtyard, my lord, exhorting the men in no uncertain terms."
"Tell him I want to see him here now," said Snapcase.
"Certainly, sir."
The barricade was taking some while to dismantle. Chair legs and planks and bedsteads and doors and balks of timber had settled into a tangled mass. Since every piece belonged to someone, and Ankh-Morpork people cared about that sort of thing, it was being dismantled by collective argument. This was not least because people who had donated a 3-legged stool to the common good were trying to take away a set of dining chairs, and similar problems. And then there was the traffic. Carts that had been held up outside the city were trying to make their way to their destinations before eggs hatched or milk got so rotten it could get out and walk the rest of the way. If Ankh-Morpork had a grid, there would have been a gridlock. Since it did not, it was, in the words of Sergeant Colon, a case of no one being able to move because of everyone else. Admittedly, this phrase, while accurate, did not have the same snap. Some of the watchmen had joined in the dismantling work, mostly to stop the fights that were breaking out among irate householders, but a group of them had congregated at the end of Heroes Street, where Snouty had set up a mess and a cocoa urn. There wasn't, in fact, much to do. A few hours ago they'd been fighting. Now the streets were so crowded that even patrols were impossible. Every good copper knows that there are times when the wise man keeps out of the way, and the conversation had turned to the kind of questions that follow victory, such as 1. Is there going to be any extra money? And 2. Are there going to be any medals? With an option on 3, which was never far from the watchman's thoughts, are we going to get into trouble about this? An amnesty means we ain't, said Dickens. It means everyone pretends nothing really happened. All right then, said Wiglet. Are we going to get medals? What I mean is, if we've been, he concentrated, valiant defenders of freedom, that sounds like medal time to me. I reckon we should simply have barricaded the old city, said Colon. Yeah, Fred, said Snouty, but then that'd mean the bad people would be in here with us. Right, but we'd be in charge, said Fred. Sergeant Dickens puffed on his pipe and said, Lads, you're just flapping your mouths. There's been fighting, and here you are with all your arms and legs and walking around in the God's good sunlight. That's winning, that is. You've won, see, the rest is just gravy. No one spoke for a while until young Sam said, But Nancy Ball didn't win. We lost 5 men in all, said Dickens. 2 got hit by arrows, 1 fell off the barricade, and 1 cut his own throat by accident. It happens. They stared at him. Oh, you thought it didn't, said Dickens. You get a lot of worried people and edged weapons and a lot of scurrying, all in one place. You'd be amazed at the casualties you can get even when you're 50 miles from an enemy. People die. Did Nancy Ball have a mum? Said Sam. He was brought up by his gran, but she's dead, said Wiglet. No one else? Dunno. He never talked about them. He never talked about anything very much, said Wiglet. What you do is you have a whip round, said Dickens firmly. Wreath, coffin, the lot. You don't let anyone else do it. And another thing. Vimes sat a little way from the men, watching the street. There were groups of former defenders and veterans and watchmen everywhere. He watched a man buy a pie from Dibbler and shook his head and grinned. On a day when you couldn't give steak away, some people would still buy a pie from Dibbler. It was a triumph of salesmanship and the city's famously atrophied taste buds. The song began. Whether it was a requiem or a victory chant he didn't know, but Dickens started it and the rest joined in, each man singing as though he was all by himself and unaware of the rest. See the little angels rise up high. Others were picking up the tune. Red Shoe was also sitting all alone on a piece of barricade currently not in dispute, still clutching the flag and looking so miserable that Vimes felt moved to go and speak to him. Rise up, how do they rise up high? It could have been good, Sergeant, said Reg, looking up. It really could. A city where a man can breathe free. They rise arse up, see the little angels rise up high. We's free, Reg, said Vimes, sitting down next to him. This is Ankh Morepork. And they all hit that line together, thought the part of him that was listening with the other ear. Strange that they should do that. Or maybe not. Yeah, make a joke of it. Everyone thinks it's funny, said Reg, looking at his feet. I don't know if this'll help, Reg, but I didn't even get my hard-boiled egg, said Vimes. And what's going to happen next? Said Reg, far too sunk in misery to sympathise or, for that matter, notice. All the little angels rise up. I really don't know. Things will get better for a while, I expect. But I don't know what I'm... Vimes stopped. On the far side of the street, oblivious to the traffic, a little wizened old man was sweeping dust out of a doorway. Vimes stood up and stared. The little man saw him and gave him a wave. And at that moment, yet another cart rumbled down the road piled high with former barricade. Vimes flung himself flat and stared between the legs and wheels. Yes, the slightly bandy legs and the battered sandals were still there, and still there too when the cart had passed, and still there when Vimes started to run across the street, and may have been there when the unregarded following cart almost knocked him over, and were completely not there when he straightened up. He stood where they had been, in the busy street, on the sunny morning, and felt the night sweep over him. He felt the hairs stand up on his neck. The conversations around him grew louder, became a clamour in his ears, and the light was too bright. There were no shadows, and he was looking for shadows now. He dodged and jinked across the street to the singing men and waved them into silence. "Get ready," he growled. "Something's going to happen." "What, Sarge?" said Sam. "Something not good, I think. An attack, maybe." Vimes scanned the street for, what, little old men with brooms? If anything, the scene was less menacing than before the Troubles, because now the other shoe had dropped. People weren't standing around waiting for it anymore. There was a general bustle. "No offence, Sarge," said Dickens, "but it all looks peaceful enough to me. There's an amnesty, Sarge. No one's fighting anyone." "Sarge! Sarge!" They all turned. Nobby Nobbs was sidling and skipping down the street. They saw his lips shape a message, completely drowned out by the squeals from a wagon-load of pigs. Lance Constable Sam Vimes looked at the face of his sergeant. "Something is wrong," he said. "Look at Sarge." "Well, what?" said Fred Colon. "A giant bird's going to drop out of the sky or something?" There was a thud and a gasp from Wiglet. An arrow had hit him in the chest and had gone right through. Another one smacked into the wall above Vimes's head, showering dust. "In here!" he yelled. The door to the shop behind them was open, and he plunged through. People piled in behind him. He heard the noise of arrows outside and one or two screams. "Amnesty, Sergeant," he said. Outside, the rumbling carts had stopped, blocking out the light, the bullseye panes of the shop windows, and temporarily shielding it. "Then it's got to be some idiots," said Dickens. "Rebels, maybe." "Why?" "There were never that many rebels, we know that. Anyway, they won." Now there was shouting outside, beyond the carts. Nothing like a cart for blocking the road. "Counter-revolutionaries, then," Dickens suggested. "What? People who want to put Winder back in charge?" said Vimes. "Well, I don't know about you, but I'd join." He looked around the shop. It was packed, wall to wall. "Who are all these people?" "You said in here, Sergeant," said a soldier. "Yeah, and we didn't need telling because it was raining arrows," said another soldier. "I didn't mean to come in, but I couldn't swim against the tide," said Dibbler. "I want to show solidarity," said Reg. "Sarge, Sarge, it's me, Sarge," said Nobby, waving his hands. A firm, authoritative voice, thought Vimes. It's amazing the trouble it can get you into. There were about 30 people crowded into the shop, and he didn't recognise half of them. "Can I help any of you gentlemen?" said a thin, querulous little voice behind him. He turned and saw a very small, almost doll-like old lady, all in black, cowering behind her counter. He looked desperately at the shelves behind her. They were piled with skeins of wool. I don't think so," he said. "Then do you mind if I finish serving Mrs. Soupson? 4 ounces of grey 2-ply, was it, Mrs. Soupson?" "Yes, please, Ethel," quavered a tiny, frightened voice somewhere in the middle of the crowd of armed men. "We'd better get out of here," muttered Vimes. He turned to the men and waved his hands frantically to suggest that, as far as possible, no one should upset any old ladies. "Do you have a back way, please?" The shopkeeper's innocent old eyes looked up at him. "It helps if people buy something, Sergeant," she said meaningfully. Vimes looked around desperately, and inspiration struck. Right, yes. I'd like a mushroom," he said. "You know, one of those wooden things for—" "Yes, Sergeant, I know. That will be 6pence, thank you, Sergeant. I always like to see a gentleman ready to do it for himself, I must say. Could I interest you in a—" "I'm in a big hurry, please," said Vimes. "I've got to darn all my socks." He nodded at the men, who responded heroically. Me too. It's full of holes, it's disgusting." "I've got to patch them up right now." "It's me, Sarge, Nobby, Sarge." "You could use mine for fishing nets." The lady unhooked a big keyring. "I think it's this one. No, I tell a lie. I think it's... No, wait a moment. Yes, this is the one." "Here, Sarge, there's a bunch of men with crossbows in the street," said Fred Colon from the window. "About 50 of them."
No, that's the one. Dear me, that's the one. That's for the lock we used to have. Does this one look right to you? Let's try this one." Very carefully and very slowly she unlocked and unbolted the door. Vimes poked his head out. They were in an alley filled with trash and old boxes and a horrible smell of alleys everywhere. No one seemed to be around. "OK, everybody out," he said. "We need a bit of space. Who's got a bow?" "Just me, Sarge," said Dickens. "It's not like we were expecting trouble, see?" 1 against 50, that's bad odds, said Vimes. "Let's get out of here." "Are they after us, Sarge?" "They shot Wiglet, didn't they? Let's move." They scuttled along the alleyway. As they crossed a wider one, there was the distant sound of the shop door being kicked open again, and a gleeful shout. "I got you now, Duke!" Carcer. An arrow clattered off a wall and pinwheeled end over end along the alley. Vimes had run before. Every watchman knew about running. They called it the backyard handicap. Vimes had taken that route many times, ducking through alleys, leaping on wings of terror over the walls from one dog-infested yard to the next, falling into the chicken runs and slipping down privy roofs, looking for safety or his mates, or failing that, somewhere to stand with his back to the wall. Sometimes you had to run. And, like the herd, you stayed together by instinct. In a crowd of 30 or so, you were harder to hit. Fortunately, Dickens had taken the lead. The old coppers were best at running, having run so much during their lives. As on the battlefield, only the cunning and the fast survived. And so he didn't bother to stop as the cart appeared at the end of the alley. It was a Hegler's wagon, probably trying to take a short cut and escape the no one being able to move because of everyone else chaos in the main streets. The man, the back of his wagon piled 10 feet high with boxes, his vehicle scraping the walls, looked in horror at the stampede heading for him. No one had any brakes, and absolutely no one was going to go backwards. Vimes, in the rear, watched the group flow over and under the wagon to the splintering of boxes and the pop of exploding eggs. The horse danced in the shafts and men dived through its legs or clear over its back. When Vimes reached it, he clambered onto the box just as an arrow hit the woodwork. He grinned desperately at the driver. "Jump," he suggested, and smacked the horse on the flank with the flat of his sword. Both men were thrown back as it reared and sent the remains of the stricken load sliding off the wagon. Vimes hauled the driver upright as soon as the debris stopped falling. He was covered in egg. "Sorry about that, sir. Watch business. Ask for Sergeant Keel. Got to rush." Behind him the wagon rattled up the alley, wheel rims knocking sparks off the walls. There were doorways and side alleyways to escape into, but Carcer's crew would certainly be slowed down. The rest of his crew had stopped when they heard the noise, but Vimes piled into them and forced them on until they reached a road, blocked with carts and thronged with people. "Well, you've got your soldiers covered in eggs, Sarge," said Sam, with a worried grin. "What's all that about?" "It's some of the unmentionables," said Vimes. "Probably want to settle the score." Well, that was close enough. "But they saw watchmen and soldiers with them," said Fred Colon. "Sarge! It's me, Sarge! Please, Sarge!" Nobby elbowed his way through the men. "Is this a good time, Nobby?" said Vimes. "There's men after you, Sarge." "Well done, Nobby." "Carcer, Sarge! He's got a job with Snapcase, captain of the Palace Guard, Sarge, and they're going to get you. Snapcase told them to, Sarge. My mate Scratch and Sniff is the underboot boy at the palace, and he was in the yard and heard 'em talking, Sarge." I should have known, Vimes thought. Snapcase was a devious devil, and now Carcer's got his feet under another bastard's table. Captain of the guard. "I haven't been making a lot of friends lately," said Vimes. "OK, gentlemen, I'm going to run. If you lot melt away into the crowd, you'll be fine, I expect." "No fear, Sarge," said Sam, and there was a general murmur of agreement. "We had an amnesty," said Dickens. "They can't do this." "Anyway, they were shooting at everyone," said one of the soldiers. "Bastards. They need a good going over." "They've got bows," said Vimes. "So we ambush 'em, Sarge," said Dickens. "Choose your ground and fight up close, and a crossbow's just a piece of wood." "Did any of you hear me?" said Vimes. "They're after me, not you. You do not want to mix it with Carcer. You, Snouty, you shouldn't be doing this at your time of life." The old jailer glared at him through runny eyes. "That's a hell of a thing to use
for you to say to me, Sarge," he said. "How do we know he won't decide to come after us anyway?" said Dickens. "An amnesty's an amnesty, right? They can't do this." There was a general chorus on lines of, "Yeah, that's right." It's happening, Vimes thought. They are talking themselves right into it. But what can I do? We've got to face them. I've got to face them. I've got to face Carcer. The thought of leaving him here with all he knows. "How about if we head down Cable Street?" said Dickens. "Lots of little alleyways off there. They'll go rushing along thinking we've bolted for the watch house, and we'll have 'em. We ain't standing for this, Sarge." Vimes sighed. "OK," he said. "Thank you. You're of one mind?" There was a cheer. "Then I won't make a speech," said Vimes. "There isn't time. I'll just say this. If we don't win this, if we don't see him off, well, we've got to, that's all. Otherwise it'll be very bad for this city. Very bad." "That's right," Dickens cut in insistently. "There was an amnesty." "But look," said one of the soldiers, "I don't know half the men here. If we're going to close in, we want to know who's on our side." "That's right," said Snouty. "I mean, some of them chasing us was watchmen." Vimes raised his eyes. The wide alley in front of them, known as Lobsneaks, stretched all the way to Cable Street. It was lined with gardens, and there were purple flowers on the bushes. The morning air smelled of lilac. "I did call a battle once," said Dickens, looking up at a tree. "In history it was, and there was this company, see, and they was a ragtag of different squads, and all covered in mud in any case, and they found themselves hiding in a field of carrots. So as a badge, they all pulled up carrots and stuck 'em on their helmets, so's they'd know who their friends were, and incidentally have a nourishing snack for later, which is never to be sneezed at on a battlefield." "Well, so what?" said Dibbler. "So what's wrong with a lilac flower?" said Dickens, reaching up and pulling down a laden branch. "Makes a spanking plume even if you can't eat it." And now, Vimes thought, it ends. "I think they are very bad men," said a high, rather elderly, but nevertheless determined voice from somewhere in the crowd, and there was a glimpse of a skinny hand waving a knitting needle. "And I shall need a volunteer to escort Mrs. Soupson home," he said.